We are live. I am delighted to be joined by operator Starsky and Jonathan MS Pierce. We may or may not have some more guests dropping in today as well, but I'm so glad you could both be with me here.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Always.
Fantastic to be here with you guys. Happy days.
Well, happy days, except it's not happy days, is it?
Well,
It seems to me, although what do I know, that Trump has given away everything and kind of got nothing in return. And I rather suspect, he's been giving things away on behalf of Ukraine. We don't know whether he's actually got approval to do any of these or agree to any of these things, or that Ukraine will indeed go along with any of the things he has apparently negotiated on their behalf. What's your reading of what's happened so far? Who wants to chip in first?
Well, should we? Is it worth reading out the press readout from?
Yes.
From that, do you have that to hand?
Let's have a look. I had to reboot my laptop as usual to get the microphone to work.
I can read the readout if you want.
Yeah, if you can read the readout, but I'll see if I can find it as well.
So today, President Trump and President Putin spoke about the need for peace and a ceasefire in the Ukraine war. Both leaders agreed this conflict needs to end with a lasting peace. They also stressed the need for improved bilateral relations between the United States and Russia. So really, that's what this is about, would be my take. The blood and treasure that both Ukraine and Russia have been spending in this war would be better spent on the needs of their people. Yeah, but again, that Ukraine have to do that. Russia chose to do that. So again, it's this both sidesism that we see. This conflict should never have started and should have been ended long ago with sincere and good faith peace efforts. The leaders agreed that the movement to peace will begin with an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, as well as technical negotiations on implementation of a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea, full ceasefire and permanent peace. These negotiations will begin immediately in the Middle East. The leaders spoke broadly about the Middle East as a region of potential cooperation to prevent future conflicts. They further discussed the need to stop proliferation of strategic weapons and will engage with others to ensure the broadest possible application. The two leaders shared the view that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel. The two leaders agreed that the future with improved bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia has huge upside. This includes enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability when peace has been achieved. In other words, the US just want to make love to Russia, get the economic benefits of so doing, equally blame Ukraine as they do Russia. There's no kind of apportioning of blame or moral culpability, political responsibility for Russia for starting the war. It's a kind of both sidesism and a bit of a nothing burger from the US side of things. But actually, I believe the readout from the Russian side is actually quite different. And they've said quite a bit more to what the Americans have said. Is my take.
Excellent. Well, I better figure out how to share screens because there's a post on Twitter from someone called Ina Sovsun. It'd be good to bring it up on the screen if I can. It says Putin backed the 30-day pause on energy strikes, then broke his word in less than an hour. Russia has hit Slavyansky's energy infrastructure, leaving half the city without power. Shocking? Absolutely not. This is sort of what we expect, isn't it, OS? We expect Putin to nominally give something away and then immediately break his word. But not only that, do it in a way that seeks to humiliate those that he is fighting. There's something intensely pathological about his behavior. And I don't know if you've seen that sort of comment there, but is it any surprise to you at all that he would break his word almost immediately?
Absolutely no surprise. Actually, he lied twice already. First time when he said that he gave an order to his troops to stop striking Ukrainian energy infrastructure. They hit the energy object in Slovyansk, and at this very moment there is a massive strike taking place on Kyiv. There are numerous shaheeds. I believe at this point more than 5 were already shot down over the Kyiv, and that is basically what the agreements with Putin worth. Second thing, he lied about prisoner exchange. He said, again, according to what the Russians were saying regarding the results of the negotiation, they said that they agreed that Putin, that Russia will exchange prisoners, 175 for 175 prisoners, but Zelensky just had a press conference just a while ago, just probably 30 minutes ago, and he said that actually this exchange has been negotiated days before. So it's not like Putin is making a gesture of a goodwill. Actually, it was already negotiated, and they were planning to have this exchange. So he already lied twice, and again, judging from my experience, okay, I've been deployed since 2015, when we had the Minsk agreements, when we had the ceasefire, and Russians would always violate the ceasefire. There were just several peaceful days, if we can call them this way, when Russians would not shoot, would not shell us in the night. And 2019, when we had like the biggest ceasefire possible after the Minsk agreements, it's when Zelensky became a president, and he explicitly ordered to withdraw Ukrainian artillery from the front lines, to withdraw our tanks and armored vehicles from the front lines, which, by the way, us as soldiers there, we perceived this step as like almost a betrayal. We were there without anything, you know. That is just so you could understand the extent to how much Zelensky wanted the ceasefire with Russians back then. So he would even sacrifice us. He would leave us there unprotected. 2019, 2020 didn't work. I lost, unfortunately, a lot of my brothers in arms. 2019, 2020, to Russian fire. That was not supposed to happen. Question is, do we believe that Putin, who started the war, wants to end the war? Do we really believe that Putin invaded Ukraine because he wanted peace? Do we really believe that he destroyed Mariupol, he destroyed Bakhmut because he didn't want people to die? This is such a BS, and we must all understand this.
Can I just disagree a little bit with what OS said? By point of fact, I think there's some confusion, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I think there's some confusion with the word agreement. So this is not an agreement that has been made that is holding in any formal way. This is, if you like, an agreement between Russia and the US, but they've got to take this back to the Ukrainians. And so Russia haven't broken any agreement by hitting Sloviansk, and Ukraine is likely to hit a load of energy infrastructure things tonight. I would imagine I would if I was them. And nothing's going to change until Ukraine come back and say, we are going to agree to this. But they're unlikely to agree to this because what the American readout didn't say is the expectations that the Russians have. So the Kremlin statement says Tatarigami, following Donald Trump's call with Putin, differs from the White House version. The Russian account includes a requirement for a 30-day truce, halting mobilization in Ukraine, suspending military aid to Ukrainian forces, and ceasing intelligence sharing. In other words, you know, it's not going to happen.
I mean,
sorry, Jonathan. The agreement has not been signed yet by any sides. No. But what we have heard was a statement that Putin already gave order not to strike the energy infrastructure in Ukraine. He already gave an order, which most possibly wasn't given at all, only like on a TV.
Right, I mean, the thing with Putin is agreements are worth absolutely nothing, are they? So, you know, getting hung up on agreement is, you know, I don't think at any point in this process we should, put some absolute, sacrosanct value in anything that Putin signs. It's all about his actions. His actions here are absolutely mockery. It is designed to be mockery. It's designed to sort of show that he has mastery of the situation. You say they're going to, do one thing, and they do the absolute opposite. Just hours later, you supposedly have a call with Trump. You keep him waiting, and you sit in the auditoriums with all your oligarchs and I would say chums. I mean, none of them actually like each other. Obviously, they all loathe each other because they're Russian oligarchs. And you're asked, shouldn't you be on a call with Trump? Peskov is trying to get in touch with you. It's the call should have happened. And Putin, obviously brushes it away contemptuously. This is all about the optics of him being the boss. And it's all about his own psychopathic unwillingness to let anyone be perceived to have got one up on him. I think. I mean, it's just, and it's going to be about optics all the way through, isn't it? There's even no point where this becomes rational.
I think Michael Clark, the analyst on Sky News, or often on Sky News and Times Radio, he said it brilliantly tonight. There's an old saying in diplomatic circles: if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And believe me, Ukraine is on the menu. Believe me, they are not at, they're on the menu. They're not at the negotiating table. So Ukraine aren't there. They're being carved up. And this is back to where, personally, I said the other day, I'm sure you said this as well, guys, which is that, the US have two options, which is if Russia either don't agree to a ceasefire or put maximalist expectations on Ukraine, the US has two options. One option is to say to Russia, no, you need to make concessions to go hard at Russia in a way that they've done to Ukraine, but actually do that to Russia. Or they take Russia's maximalist intentions and take them to Ukraine. And if Ukraine doesn't sign up to them, they hit Ukraine with a big stick. And it's that second option that seems absolutely on the cards here, and was always going to be on the cards because the US has functionally joined Russia.
Yeah, this is where it's heading, but it's going to be Ukraine. Obviously, they strike with a big stick, or as General Kellogg said, with a 2x4, as you would a farm animal. It's a graceful, disgusting human being. That image could even come into his head in referring to an ally and a country he's visited and a president whose hand he's shaken. But they're going to be taking this big stick to Europe as well, because I don't think Europe is going to buckle down and agree to the delivery of Ukraine on a plate. Ukraine isn't going to agree to that. Trump is going to turn on Europe as well for supporting Ukraine when inevitably, we decide that these conditions, that Ukraine is right to reject these conditions, and we support Ukraine rather than the American version. At least that's what I hope. I mean, judging by Rutte's behavior, I have some concerns, it has to be said, but I think the majority of European countries will not acquiesce to delivering Ukraine up, because essentially everything that Putin is asking for, and I'll bounce this back to OS, everything Putin's asking for is designed to weaken Ukraine. There's no other explanation behind any of those conditions, and that is to prevent Ukraine from striking back, prevent Ukraine from defending itself, because Putin knows that actually Ukraine is rather effective at doing that, and especially.
But that's super important, Jonathan. So look, the main things that Russia asked of Ukraine or demanded of Ukraine through the US tonight was that there's a halt on energy infrastructure strikes. Now, Russia are going to go to the US, as I would. If I was Putin, I would do exactly what Putin's done, which is like, where are we hurting the most? Let's use that as a bargaining chip. So we are hurting because we are getting our oil depots and our refineries absolutely hammered. So that's where we want a ceasefire. So they've gone for a ceasefire and the things that hurt the most. So if Ukraine are going to know this, which is like, well, but they're going to look like they're the bad guys, not the bad guys, but they're the ones being a problem in this agreement, because Russia have come to them with a an idea, and they're going to say no, because that's where we are hammering you. That's what we want to keep doing. We want a ceasefire over here, or in this context, or doing something over here. I think, but having said that, Zelensky himself suggested an aerial ceasefire previously. So, but I think that until there is anything agreed, you are going to see both sides bomb the shite out of each other.
Well, this was unconditional. I mean, what Zelensky was asking for was an unconditional surrender. Unconditional ceasefire. And Trump's got nothing close to that. Nothing close to that. You know, we'll put something on the table that won't make any difference if Ukraine stops. If we stop striking Ukraine, they've shown themselves to have reasonable energy resilience across the country and to bounce back relatively quickly. So Russian airstrikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure is not actually having a huge, larger logistical effect on the war, whereas Ukrainian strikes on Russian oil infrastructure are, and the capability to increase those and increase their effect is very much one of the cards that Ukraine has. OS, is it clear that Trump is now fully working to the benefit of Russia? Can you see anything at all that he's done or said which would be to the benefit of Ukraine?
Well, he restarted the military aid and intelligence sharing after he had stopped it.
That's
well done.
So,
That
well
was
done.
in 1984.
back.
The book 1984 by George Orwell was like, we're going to halve chocolate rations, and then they add it back 20%, and they go, look how kind we are. Yeah.
yeah, but generally speaking, I didn't hear or see anything that he would do to literally benefit Ukraine, because he stopped the program that would investigate the crimes committed by Russians in Ukraine. He stopped the program that investigated the children that were kidnapped by Russians and deported to Russia. He did a lot of things, like literally to wash, to take the Russian image, put it into laundry and bring it back clear. I don't know how else to describe it. And what we see now is that Putin is Trump again. Same shit. Trump is literally doing the Lavrov's job. Actually, I think that position of foreign minister in Russia would fit Trump much better than Lavrov, because Lavrov is an old dying horse, and nobody wants, to see that ugly face, ugly grumpy Slav on the TV. I don't know such a person, but Trump would fit there really, really well. And returning to previous questions, of course, the energy infrastructure is something that hurts Putin, right? The strikes on the energy infrastructure in Russia, the oil factories, and that is why he talks about it. Western weaponry is something that hurts Russia. That is why he talks about it. And if we remember the notorious visit of Tucker Carlson to Russia last year, that is again something that Putin talked about with Tucker Carlson to deliver this message to the Western audience that we should stop supporting Ukraine, stop bringing our weapons to Ukraine so it could not defend against Russia well, right? And this narrative that, you should stop defending yourself from Russia or you will die sounds absolutely ridiculous. But today we've heard some really strong statement made by Friedrich Merz in Germany, who said that Russia attacking Ukraine is not just about Ukraine, it's Russia attacking Europe. Russia attacking Europe through its sabotage operations, through its misinformation, and he made it very clear that AfD is part of this misinformation, as well as other marginal movements in other countries. He said that this is the war against Europe. This is why we have to prepare to fight back, to defend ourselves. Trump was probably very much surprised because, Trump always considered Ukraine being an American puppet. And all of a sudden, when he says, well, Ukrainians, it's time to, time to give up, time to die, actually. And Ukrainians said, like, actually, we're not really, ready to die. There are people screaming sometimes like, Ukraine wants to bring the world to the brink of the World War III. Guys, when you're in Ukraine, when you are hiding your children in the basement, when you are hit by the Russian kamikaze drones or missiles or bombs or artillery shells, you don't really care if this is World War III already or not. It's
Or
war,
two, or one, because,
yeah,
you could be fighting
don't
any
really
world
care.
war.
The problem is, unfortunately, there are people who don't really understand the situation because they will never imagine themselves under fire in a city that was peaceful only yesterday, and city located in the heart of Europe, actually. So unfortunately, we have this situation, and Ukraine replied to Trump basically that we are not ready to die. Sorry, we're not dying just because you don't want to have World War III. Maybe it's like proper thing to deal with somebody who is threatening you with the World War III rather than dealing with your allies, right? Because it's not Ukraine brings the World War III. That's a big terrorist state that is called Russian Federation. That is the problem. So when Merz said today that Russia attacking Ukraine is actually Russia attacking Europe, he was 100% right, and this message is very, very strong. This message underlines that Europeans also don't want to die. Europeans also understand the threat, and they understand that if Putin keeps continuing his hybrid and informational warfare in Europe, as well as his war of aggression in Ukraine, it's something that is threatening all the European nations. Sorry, we are not gonna die just because, Trump says, guys, please stop military supply to Ukraine. Won't happen. Europeans, again, they are also not American puppets, and it doesn't work like that. Time to wake up, time to understand that there are no American puppets. There are people, there are states with people who live and think, and some of those people, unfortunately, are being killed on a daily basis by Russians who didn't start this war because they wanted peace. They started this war because they wanted to kill. And Russians are the problem.
That's it. And I think Macron, whether he'll follow up with action is remains to be seen. But his phrase certainly was very good, and that was, "We do not need permission to send troops to Ukraine. After all, Russia did not ask anyone's permission to send North Korean army onto the territory of Europe." Now, hopefully, the language and the rhetoric of Merz and Macron, and the sort of more quiet diplomatic language, nonetheless still forceful of Starmer, hopefully they'll follow that up with actions. Greg, let's do a proper welcome to Greg.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you for joining us.
It is my honor. Love being here with you, Jonathan's, and my dear friend Starsky. We did a live together yesterday, so back at it again. I am catching up. Actually, it was very interesting, and I know you guys have probably covered all of this, but I just, in case you haven't, I'll just give my 2 minutes here, and maybe it'll spur on further conversation. It was interesting because earlier today, Professor Gertis called me, and just like all of us, I consider all of you guys my personal friends, and I just believe that we'll be lifelong friends. But he called, and for an hour and a half, we were watching and waiting because in the United States, it was stated earlier, and I know you guys are not here. So in the US earlier today, it was stated that Trump, immediately after the Putin call, would be having a press conference where he would step out and make statements. not the press secretary. Well, once the call ended, so I'm watching literally 3 different countries for media. I'm watching the United States, I'm watching Ukrainian media, and I'm watching Russian media. So I've got like 20 tabs open, and I'm watching everything that's coming out of all 3 countries so that we could see when the call ended. And then, and Gertis was on the phone with me, and I said, okay, Kremlin just said the call's over. And then it was the US said, okay, the call's over. Then Ukrainians were saying, okay, the call's over. We're expecting Trump to step out and make a statement. He said it would be quickly coming. And then it was like 5 minutes went by, 15 minutes went by, 30 minutes went by. And then we just started talking amongst ourselves and saying, you know what, this, he has nothing to say, first of all. So he's not going to make a statement. And then we see the debacle that came out with the statement. And there are a couple of things in that are very disturbing. The statement calling it Putler's talking points of a conflict, and how quickly they moved on to talking about geopolitical stability, how quickly they moved on to talking about bringing peace to the Middle East, and how that the Trump-Putin leadership coalition, the most powerful leaders in the world, are responsible for geopolitical peace around the world, and it's our responsibility for economic glory for the world, and it's our responsibility that there'll be non-nuclear proliferation, and it's our responsibility. All they did, I guess, was gloat on each other. But there are some interesting things I want to draw your attention to. Yesterday on Air Force One, and I'm sure you guys have seen the video, Donald Trump steps out. He's being interviewed by a reporter on Air Force One. I think Starsky and I talked about this just yesterday, where Trump said, yes, tomorrow on the call, we will be talking about, and I quote, land. They got lots of land. Secondly,
assets is where assets.
Dividing certain assets.
Yep. And we're going to be talking about that big power plant that's on the border. That big power plant. The big power plant is not on the border, sir. It's in the city of Energodar, which is in the smack dab middle of the Zaporizhia Oblast, inside of beautiful Ukraine, occupied by. I just watched Lord of the Rings last night for the first time with my son. Now I understand occupied by the orcs, as they were called early on in the war. And that is an absolute disaster. And then you guys are right. He talks about dividing the assets. Okay. So then I started watching what was the official statement coming from the Kremlin, official statement coming from the US. We analyzed all of that and went through it line by line. And it was so interesting because it's all Kremlin talking points. It's all Putin talking points. And the only thing that was agreed to, and we just assumed that once, and Zelensky confirmed it, once he had made the agreement there for the Trump administration to go meet with Putin or Witkoff or Trump or whoever it would be about the truce offer, silence in the skies, silence in the sea, silence on the ground, and an agreement to not strike energy targets. And Putin, of course, came back with his little agreement on that early on in their conversation. And of course, you guys have already been talking about it, but we know that is already broken. And it was broken really within minutes. And I was trying to explain to people, it was not about, even while they were still talking, the Shaheeds had already been launched. You need to know that the Kremlin stated that Putin had given the command to his military to stand down on attacking energy infrastructure. So they made this statement that he had pushed this order out, and the Shaheeds were already flying. That garnered some attention, but really what struck me was when the MLRS system attacked Slavyansk. That was not a Shaheed that attacked it within an hour or so after this and de-energized Slavyansk. So there you have proven targeted MLRS system directly at infrastructure. I can also tell you within just a few minutes ago, hospital was hit, the roof of a hospital in Sumy. So from that point, I started waiting to hear what Zelensky was going to say. And finally, he did speak. He's out traveling. The other thing that bothered me, and I'm sure you guys have already talked about it, but I'll have said my 2 cents, and then we can continue with however you're going. What really frustrated me was the hockey game. Yes, Starsky.
Yeah, please go on. I just wanted to share some news that we have. Please go on. I will continue after you.
Okay, so thank you. The hockey game. Okay, this friendship. This we're going to create this economic powerhouse. You guys have seen it all. You see it. You know it. But I'm interested in Zelensky's response. So I just was looking for his video, his responses, and he was very point blank when he stated, I want to see what Trump is going to do with this. How do you make this happen? These words that you're saying about energy infrastructure. And I know Ukrainians, and there's a Ukrainian in this stream with us. Like the personality, I could tell you right now, if Starsky was like angry by just mannerisms, you begin to know culture. You know your people, I know my people. If you go watch Zelensky's response tonight, he's sitting there talking. He's not happy. He's not happy. He's saying the right words, but he's not happy. For example, the 175 prisoner of war exchange that Putin, out of goodwill, was offering. Zelensky already knew about that days ago from the GUR and the SBU. So that is nothing new. Zelensky also speaking just a few minutes ago that we expect new offensive actions with maximum power coming Zaporizhia way, Kharkiv way, and Sumy way. He says we absolutely support the non-striking of energy. However, if our energy systems are struck, we will respond. The other thing that was interesting, no mention of North Korean troops from Trump, and Rosatom also announcing today that they are beginning the process of integrating the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Zelensky coming out and responding tonight that there will absolutely 100% never be an integration of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So there's my whole story. And Starsky, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, let's say hello to DW as well. Before
hello,
DW.
Good to see you, fellas.
We have a small update coming from the Russian media. There is a message from a journalist who reported that his sources that were present there during the negotiation, the phone negotiation between Putin and Trump, said that Russia is ready to stop the so-called special military operation in case the West and Ukraine officially recognize Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia Oblast Russian territories, which of course will never happen. But there is a chance that our former allies, and we're talking about not the US people, but the US current administration, can actually do that, because nothing is impossible nowadays.
Nothing is impossible. I mean, we'll let DW jump in with his impressions, which I know you've been busy on LinkedIn, sort of posting your readout on all this. But after that, let's turn to what some of these worst case scenarios should be, because my effort is in the coming weeks to try and reach out to European policymakers and decision makers so they can understand better what Putin is, what his ambitions are, and what the worst case scenario may well be with Trump. Also, Timothy Ash, who's a well-known economist and extremely pro-Ukrainian, but I'd like to think also extremely rational. He produced a Substack article laying out what he thinks some of the worst case scenarios for Russian collaboration with US collaboration with Russia could be. And there's some pretty dark stuff in there. DW.
Well, I think the first thing to recognize is that everything that's happening right now is a charade, and the world knows it's a charade. The only people that do not know that it's a charade are the people inside the White House who are helping to orchestrate it. And when I say it's a charade, what I mean is this. There was a time, even as recently as 3 weeks ago, when most Republicans in America and even the European community would have said, we believe Donald Trump is the man to bring peace to the world. They didn't know how he was going to do it. They weren't sure what his motivations were exactly, but they thought if somebody could do it, it could be Donald Trump. Nobody believes that today. And I really mean that. Right now, the position is basically this. We want to make sure Donald Trump does as little damage to the world order as possible. And that's the reason why Zelensky is still in. Zelensky is not in because he thinks that Donald Trump is going to bring in a peace so that the United States is instrumental in helping to orchestrate some sort of beneficial outcome for Ukraine. The United States has sold Ukraine down the toilet. Our positions over the course of the last month have been the greatest reversal of foreign policy in the history of the United States. I'm an unusual person. I'm not a Democrat. I come from a more conservative historical background, and I can say that the Republicans, that there never has been a greater betrayal of a vision of freedom. We've moved from a moral-based vision where we proclaim freedom to one which is purely transactional and pro-Russian. And so one has to ask, where are we headed with all of this? And what happened today was an obvious example of the trajectory that we've been on for several weeks. And we are not in any reality that Donald Trump is involved. There is no reality where we are working towards a real, legitimate form of peace. The reason why we keep talking this way is because we realize that the United States has a very big stick they're holding. They have a tremendous amount of power. And if our president is not sufficiently mollified, appeased, and flattered, he could do things which are so catastrophic that it would take a century for us to recover from the damages. And so Zelensky's playing the game. And he's holding on to what he needs to do. I think he's doing exactly what he should be doing. I think he has to play the game. But not only should we not be surprised, all of our thoughts right now should be on what is our alternative plan? Because the United States is not going to help peace or world order. I'm brokenhearted to say this. I'm a patriotic American, and I'm crushed to say this. But we are not going to do it. I just make one more comment about what happened today. I've read all the major news reports. Not one person has said the obvious. Here's the obvious. The Trump ceasefire accord was annihilated. It was destroyed today.
Yes.
Zelensky and the United States made the simplest proposition to Russia. And Russia made a beautiful counter move for, a KGB typical counter move, which is we will give you something which is really giving you nothing at all in order to claim the high ground, to shut down any meaningful change, and most importantly, to silence Ukraine for the rest of the peace negotiations. We're going to rob Ukraine of the moral high ground, and we're going to silence them. So once again, they're the bad guys to Donald Trump. They're the problem. They're the impediments to what's taking place. But Americans need to be looking into their cameras, calling their senators and saying, today, a KGB operative who run a Soviet-trained, Marxist-Leninist trained anti-American with Soviet imperial ambitions basically talked the president of the United States of America into just pretending like the entire deal they just worked on didn't happen and Ukraine didn't matter, and we're going to move on without a word. So it's not a good day. This is not a good moment for U.S. history or for geostrategic politics.
Jonathan, can you share my screen?
Yes, I'm sure I can.
While he's doing that, I would just like to say, DW, it's nice to meet you. And I also, sir, am a conservative American, and I am disgusted. And as the late, great Peter Michael Fouché would say, I'm very ashamed of coming out of the White House in my country that I love so much, but today I do not recognize.
I'm with you. I was a very young man. I was a 20-year-old young man working for President Ronald Reagan, fighting the Soviets in Angola and in Central America as a young guy in my life. And there is no scenario in which I could have imagined that America would be jumping sides with Russia. And I'm just, forgive me for this one interjection. I've been very nervous about the rare mineral deal. And the reason why I've been nervous about it, and a lot of my friends disagree with me, but I think that if the United States has boots on the ground in Ukraine at scale, it gives President Trump the basis for intervening on behalf of Russia. And the reason why I say that is if you have American troops on the ground, American citizens, they don't have to be troops. If you have 5,000 Americans in Ukraine who are benefiting the American economy, anything could trigger interventionism against Ukraine, especially regime change on the part of the President of the United States. So I'm not positive to the deal because I don't think American presence stops Russian aggression.
That's an interesting angle. And we were talking about this with Jonathan in a recent one, which is, it's my view that the minerals deal is the public puppet show that everyone's
Sure.
focused on. There's likely to be a deal behind the scenes directly with Putin to carve up Ukraine, to carve up the East and the West, to give Trump access to occupied territories, no matter where that demarcation line falls. So again, yeah, with the minerals deal, that's I've not felt really comfortable about that at all. Never mind the extortion that is implicit, in the very sort of negotiated negotiation. Jonathan, I'm going to add your screenshot back.
So it started off, if this is true, if the timing here is true, it started off really badly today for Trump, because Putin publicly dissed Trump. So he was at some kind of conference where he was speaking, and the guy next to him kind of leans over and says, you've got to be on a call with Donald Trump now. And Putin just went, meh. So it was.
This is what I referenced earlier. Yeah, I mean, it's the whole thing is belittling. You want to belittle Ukraine by immediately striking them. This is also contemptuous behavior before and immediately after towards Trump and the US.
So
this
JP,
should not be a surprise.
It's absolutely incredible.
Where he was actually was at an economic forum there in Moscow. And it was a closed forum, basically, of Russian oligarchs, Russian business owners, talking about the Russian revival of the economy and how the sanctions, although have had an effect, have not worked. And what they've actually done is stimulated the Russian mind and the Russian great economic machine to look to other avenues. And as we proceed further, I watched a lot of that. And as we proceed further, if the Western countries that departed us so abruptly when we got into this conflict of the special military operation, and the knee-jerk reaction was to leave Russia by the Western companies, then it will not be so easy for them to come back. They will be coming back to a different Russia. They will be coming back to a different set of rules. And additionally, we have plenty of options, friends and partners to resource with economically. At that time, the guy leaned over and says, you need to be on your phone call coming up with Donald Trump. Peskov is giving us an indication right now that's what need to happen. And Putin's actual joke was, listen, you can't pay attention to Peskov. Everything he says is a lie. So basically, that's what happened there in a nutshell. But complete disregard. Once again, it's the same story as Witkoff. Yes, they made him wait. And yes, and I can tell you the memes were already flying inside Russia, because I watch a lot of Russian straight media, and it was Donald Trump sitting at a desk. He had dialed Putin, and it said, Kremlin, can you hold, please? And Trump sitting there on the desk, running his finger. So they were letting it go. But I just don't understand how that can happen, and people not understand the importance of those little micro movements.
And I wonder if Trump knows that, or whether Trump convinces himself of some other narrative. Like, does he take that as an insult? Because if he's personally insulted, then actually that will give some ammunition for him to be more sympathetic with Ukraine. But if he creates himself this other narrative that kind of excuses Putin's behavior, which is just as likely, then actually he's just giving. I mean, the good news.
But this is like bringing truth to power. Who around Trump is going to approach him and say, "Hey, Donald, right? I should really explain the situation here. This guy you idolize, Putin. This guy you want to become like. This boss of bosses who, in your dreams, you replace. He loathes you and he mocks you with his every breath." Who in Donald Trump's circle is going to have the balls to do that? Not a single one of them.
There's an important story which I think will be coming out in the months to come. Actually, I'm doing research on it right now for an investigative reporting piece I'm working on, and that's what is actually happening inside the White House. So here are some things we know that are happening inside the White House. The White House right now is divided into two camps. One camp is the Tucker Carlson camp. And as you may be fully aware, Tucker Carlson's son Buckley is the speechwriter for J.D. Vance, and some have alleged that he wrote the Munich speech. I can't prove that. That was told to me by a British member of parliament. I don't have the facts on that yet. But you get this one group, and the Tucker Carlson camp are true believers in the Soviet cause. They are complete Putin individuals. They will die for it. They're real believers. And you know who they are. That's Tulsi Gabbard, J.D. Vance. I don't know. I describe him as a real believer. I would describe him as not a strong individual who has been captured and is presently following that particular dialogue. And there are others as well that are there. Then there are people that are less outspoken, less aggressive, but who have had to live with this reality, the Marco Rubios. And when all this started, I thought I had really high hopes for Marco Rubio because I think he's a decent man. But whatever has happened to Marco Rubio, it's a disappointment of epic proportions. I don't know what to
He ain't
say.
getting them back. They're in a little trophy cabinet somewhere. You know, they're not reattaching those things.
I have a feeling that at some point Walsh and you saw what they did to Kellogg, of course, but at some point Walsh and Rubio fell into a ethical dilemma that we often see, and the dilemma goes like this: okay, if I say something, I'm out of here. And isn't it better for me to be here and try to do something good than to have somebody else come in? But the price of failing that ethical dilemma is you sell your soul to the devil. And that's part of what we're looking at. And I'm not calling Donald Trump the devil. I'm simply saying that the concept of this.
I would say some of his people around him are pretty close. There's Russell Vought is one of the people you're probably referring to.
Yeah,
so
that's
Russell
correct.
Vought is one of the main creators of the Project 2025 900-page document. Again, you got Tucker Carlson very closely involved with Heritage Foundation through his father, lobbying for Viktor Orban. Heritage Foundation very close to Budapest and Viktor Orban. And
Miller's pretty dark character.
Yeah, Stephen Miller is a terrible human being. I mean, he is actually evil. But Russell Vought is honestly one of the guys that people need to be paying attention to, because I think he's something of an architect there. You got these two camps, and Kellogg was sidelined. Marco Rubio's been muted effectively, and he's completely morally compromised now. And so you got nothing left. I mean, Mike Waltz was maybe on a good day, if the wind's in the right direction, going to be someone that might have said something nice for Ukraine, but really
no longer.
Greg's very politely got his hand up. Greg,
I'm still just trying to recover that Jonathan M.S. Pierce mentioned the devil.
Yeah, this is. I mean, obviously, it's a conceptual.
I got you, brother. I got you again.
I mean, this is the secular devil. Yeah.
No, but it's great. You're spot on, JP. I'm just having a little fun there, and people that know us for so long know we love this banter. But I'm absolutely disgusted. I shared 2 weeks ago the Rubio statements about the evil of the Russian Empire and the great speech he made there. And I compared that to the Marco Rubio of today. And it is literally as if this man went into a wardrobe and came out a different human being. And you can't come back from that. I just agree with you guys. I don't see how you come back from such and you know, the slang is, selling your soul to the devil. I really had hopes in Marco Rubio. I really did. I agree with you, DW. And I'm so saddened by the choices he has now made.
I mean, for those who weren't really observing Trump's first term, either you got fired because you ultimately disagree with him and you preserved something of your dignity. And there were quite a few adults in the first administration, I think Mark Milley and others, who they went along with it for a certain amount of time, but there came a point where they just hit a barrier. And these people have preserved something of their dignity. But those that go all in with Trump, they lose their dignity, their values evaporate. It's like, iron in the heart of a star. It just kills any values whatsoever. But also he has an extraordinary way of projecting his simply awful awful business sense. You know, people call him a good businessman. He absolutely is not a good businessman.
No.
He's bankrupted businessmen. He's bankrupted his own businesses. He's in the process of bankrupting the US by going into a recession. He is on the verge of bankrupting Elon Musk, the richest man in the world. This is the effect he has. It's absolutely, you know, degrading to both values and to wealth. Why
Starsky,
can't people see that?
Can I ask Starsky a question? Brother, do you think, as a Ukrainian, as a veteran, and as an expert on propaganda, do you think Donald Trump cares anything at all about Ukraine? When it comes down to the root of your heart as a Ukrainian, okay? Because you know there are a lot of Americans that care and fight for Ukraine, and it's just so disheartening for DW myself. Honestly, I'm speaking for him, but he already made the statement, and I'm in complete agreement. And it's just so troubling, man, for me personally, But as a Ukrainian in your background, do you think he even cares about Ukraine?
Well, let's check out what he said, right? He made a statement that he wants the war to die because it was actually, I believe, today when journalists asked Trump if he considers President Zelensky a dictator, then does he consider Putin a dictator? And you probably already know what was the answer. Instead of answering literally yes or no, because it's a really, really easy question, he said, well, President Zelensky and Putin will have to work together because so many people die and this war should be stopped. Have you seen those satellite images? There's fields of bodies and like, if I was a journalist, I would feel freaking insulted by this because you don't answer media like that. You must have at least some kind of respect to journalists visiting your press conference. But what he says is, he says basically, yeah, I want to stop killing, right? But again, when there were debates between him and Kamala Harris, he was asked twice, does he want Ukraine to win this war?
Good point.
And he didn't answer, which is basically already is an answer. He didn't want Ukraine to win the war. That is clear.
He's an oligarch, though. I mean, does he care about the US actually as a concept? He's quite happy to use it and hug the flag. But as an oligarch, his power is multinational. It goes beyond identity. It goes beyond, in fact, it has no concept of honor or valor or anything that people might die for that isn't monetary. All he seems to care about is simply assets, resources, money, and of course, you know, what they can add to his status. I'll come back to that thought in a minute because there's a fundamental difference between Russia and how Trump thinks. But yeah, back to you, OS.
I think that there are some objective tests that we can look at when we ask the question, does somebody care? And they're not complicated. They apply in real life. If you care, you show them decency. If you care, you show them civility. What took place in the Oval Office 3 weeks ago was the lowest, the darkest moment in the history of the White House. There never has been a more incivil, inappropriate disregard for a head of state. President Zelensky is the leader. He's the commander-in-chief of the 6th largest military in the world. He's an international leader of great substance. And he had the courage to walk by himself into the lion's den. He wasn't listened to. He was mocked at constantly by the president as well. It wasn't just JD. It was from the moment he stepped up, the president made fun of his clothing. They had this atrocious boyfriend of Marjorie Taylor Greene there. There was a KGB reporter who made it into the Oval Office before it was thrown out that very same day. Unbelievable. And they treated this leader with absolute contempt. So I don't know how you can say that you care about people if you're treating them with contempt. On the other hand, we see tremendous deference and loyalty and respect and civility to the president of Russia, to the leader of Russia. And it's almost as if before Putin is the alpha male and Trump is the beta.
So this is something Vlad Vexer has talked about. So given Putin's narcissistic personality disorder, which is armchair psychologist, you know, yeah, we can all do that, but he clearly has it, right? There is something that Vexer talked about in terms of narcissistic submission, where he submits to an even greater person than himself, as he sees it, in order to elicit adulation from them, which is another form of, you know, he's the alpha male to all these other people who give him adulation, all the MAGA crowd. And then there's this other great person that he looks up to in order to elicit that adulation as well. And it's also worth noting that he doesn't care about anything other than himself due to his narcissism, or arguably, I would say his children, I would say just his daughter. And even then, there are weird sexual overtones. Like if you see some of the things in some of those interviews from a few years ago where he was literally leering over his daughter, like it's the most disturbing thing I think I've ever seen in any interview I've seen. There's two separate interviews I can remember where he says the most inappropriate things about his daughter, and you're like, yeah, that's about the only thing he cares for. Can I just say, so today, some really good news though, although this sounds a bit bellicose and hawkish, but the really good news is Germany have really stood up. 500 billion euros in terms of defense and infrastructure, rearmament and stimulus. So that is fantastic. They've changed the debt brake. They've gone, and Merz has done what he said he was going to do, even though he's not officially chancellor yet, etc., etc. So that's really good. And Macron has done and said a bunch of stuff today. So he is, and yesterday, he's tooling up the French armed forces. He's getting the expenditure as a percentage of GDP up to, I think he's aiming to get it to 3.5, which is huge for France. It's a quite indebted nation, but he's also sort of got it onto more of a war footing. There were elements of war footing that he had given him or the French government the ability to say to some of the arms manufacturers, you need to do this and that. That happened actually like a year ago, but last couple of days he's furthered that. So there are things in place for these two massive countries, and UK is kind of doing similar, although I don't think we're as able in terms of we're a bit economically in the hot water. But you've got Europe. Europe is coming together. There are issues with, of course, Hungary and Slovakia, but you know there is a unity. It is like turning a tanker, but I guess the big question, I'd be interested to know what you guys think about this, or to find out what you think about this. Clearly, the US still have this big stick that they can, or they've got leverage with Ukraine, such that Ukraine really wants to do, you know, when Trump says jump, they say how high. What is it? What is the main thing? Is it the intelligence? Is it the aid? Because they're not getting any further aid, and they're not getting any further money at the moment. Are they worried about actual aid being given to Russia instead of them? Like, what is the big worry, do you guys think, that Zelensky has if he doesn't do what Trump says?
It's I think it's actually quite clear. Trump has already indicated that he is going to throw his support away from whoever he perceives to be the troublemaker, or whoever he claims is the troublemaker. So if Zelensky just pulls out, if Zelensky just says, forget Washington, D.C., it's as close to 100% likely that Trump will in some way back Russia. And I mean, by backing Russia, I mean more than just voting in the
Is
UN,
that some way, though? What is that some way?
It could be many things. I really don't know. I mean, it could be blocking.
Well, we have an example already. I mean, there is a rumor already that when the US cut off the satellite data and the various sort of targeting data to Ukraine, that somehow Russia has access to this data. Now, this may be just turning a blind eye to commercial entities, letting it go. It may be through hacking. It may be through third-party intermediaries and various scams. But everything that's been provided to Ukraine could potentially end up being provided to Russia. And they wouldn't necessarily have to pass a bill in Congress or something. All the president has to do is to not enforce prosecutions of companies, let's say, breaking the law. We're already seeing numerous instances of Trump actually doing this. Numerous things, ignoring, edicts from judges, bypassing all sorts of things with the activities of Doge. He's figured out you don't have to get something passed in the legislature in order to do it. All you have to do is to crack on with it or turn a blind eye when other people do, and then you just bat away the lawsuits and whatever. So unfortunately, there's an awful lot they can do.
On this point, as you know, Jonathan, my new friends may not be aware of this, but I'm a filmmaker, but I'm also an attorney. I specialize in constitutional law, and presently a lot of my work has to do with international war crimes issues. That's a focus and a passion I have right now, which I think is quite important. Yesterday, the United States withdrew from the organization with The Hague that is investigating Russian war crimes. It's got a little bit of news in the papers, but the significance is so far-reaching. And I'd say a broader perspective I have, which I might need to explain for it to make sense, but it is that it is more important that we retain the moral high ground than that we lose the physical lower ground. And by that, I mean, it doesn't look like Ukraine is going to be able to immediately in the present time, get back Crimea, although they should never, give up the right to it, of course, or the East. But I would rather that area is frozen than that we give Russia a pass on being the greatest war criminal state since the Nazis in World War II. If we give a pass morally, ethically, judicially to Russia, we have basically imprisoned our children and our grandchildren to a world where it is absolutely okay to wage war on civilians, where rape, murder, torture, horrible things. Jonathan, my board member was in Bucha 2 days after the Russians left, and he was one of the men that actually was doing the cleanup and burying the bodies and gathering information on the Russian soldiers that were there. I went back to Bucha with a film crew. Bucha, of course, is just one place. There are many Buchas. It's just that we're now in the anniversary month of Bucha. The idea that the criminals who committed those atrocities in Bucha and Irpin, and I was actually meeting with Christian pastors in Irpin. You know what these people are doing? They're trying to stop the 16-year-old, 18-year-old little Baptist girls from committing suicide because they were raped repeatedly by Russians under occupation. That's the job of the pastors in Irpin right now. It's beyond the comprehension of Americans. It's just absolutely beyond what Americans can understand. And the question is, are we going to give a pass? Are we going to give a pass? And the United States has said, we're not only going to give a pass, we're going to cover it up. To me, that's worse by far than, whatever the particular line is with the peace accord. Because if we lose this, we lose absolutely everything. So President Trump has agreed to this.
Yes, complicit. It's complicit.
It's in terms of its implications, long term. If you cede the ethical foundation, if you give up the moral high ground, if you validate what Russia has done, only then have you lost the war. Only then.
And this is the tricky
that's what
question.
Zelensky was fighting. That's what Zelensky was fighting for in the Oval Office. People don't realize this.
Yes.
Zelensky had a mission to defend the integrity of Ukraine. How can he back down on that? And the point of the administration at the White House was to crush him on the ethical high ground.
Yes.
And he wouldn't agree to that. So out he went. We should be, every American who, we're in our 250th anniversary year of the founding of America. No disrespect to my British friends on the panel here. The 250th year. And in our 250th year, we have despised the very principles of give me liberty or give me death, freedom, which were enshrined in our founding documents and in the hearts and minds of the American patriots that helped to birth our country.
I couldn't disagree with a single.
I am
word of
loving
that,
BW, by the way. DW, we've got to make a friendship, man. I'm appreciating everything you're stating. If you go back to the Bucha thing, if you remember the picture of the gentleman that was killed on the bicycle falling over, actually was a youth pastor from the Kyiv region, a personal friend of. Oh, I've known him. I had known he was murdered there, and that was. I've worked in Ukraine, DW, for 28 years now. So that was a youth pastor just
really?
Yes, sir.
Wow. And, I didn't know that.
No, I've known him. I had known him, for at least a dozen to 15 years. And my partner, Zhenya, called me and says, Greg, you're not going to believe what just happened. Turn on the TV and that picture, he goes, there he lays. And I won't call his name because I don't have permission to, but you're spot on, sir. Zelensky coming out right now, just a couple of minutes ago, clarifying. He shared the picture of the strike on the hospital in Sumy, and I have that picture for you if you want to show it, Jonathan, but you don't have to. But that. Right there. That is actually the hospital in Sumy. Been there many times helping guys. That's happening right now. And Zelensky just clarifying his statement and saying, so you see, this is the response from the Russian Federation effectively canceling our truce agreement. So he clarified those words a little bit, effectively canceling our truce agreement. And if you'll leave that there, one more thing I just want to show. I'm sending it now. Let's see. There you go. Thank you. So this is his view in referring to Donald Trump. My phone conversation today with President Trump, with President Putin of Russia, was a very good and productive one. We can stop right there. I don't even have to read any further. We agreed to immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure and so on. We need this horrible war to end, et cetera, et cetera. Humanity, let's get the job done. The bottom line is that is how he views this. So for me, not only is he is complicit in this, but it's obvious to me that there is an actual direct support working its way through the channels to make it very difficult for Ukraine to fight. And he's playing this game. He's playing this game and trying to play both sides of the fence, but you can't play both sides of the fence. And it's very unfortunate. And I think effectively the truce offer is even off the table now.
To Jonathan's
guys,
point earlier,
right at this moment,
right
at this moment, there's approximately 40 Russian drones over Ukraine. They're reported by the Ukrainian Air Defense. And from what I can say, approximately 20 of them are around Kyiv or approaching Kyiv or already around Kyiv. There's Ukrainian Air Defense working trying to shoot down the Russian drones over the Kyiv downtown. And also there are several drones heading actually to my neighborhood in Kyiv, where I lived. So this is basically the cost of Russian ceasefire. We can see the strike happening right now on the capital of Ukraine, and those drones are targeting Ukrainian civilian infrastructure.
It's despicable beyond words, but completely expected. I think one of the other things that Zelensky is doing in the Oval Office, and then in apologizing afterwards and going along with some of the charade, I think he's also buying time consciously for Europe to get its act together. And I think Europeans are talking with Zelensky. They're planning. It's a little bit like Neville Chamberlain, who realizes he's screwed up. I think it's just play along with the game and get your shit together. I think that's what's partly going on.
Great point, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Can I just say something to what DW is saying? While I completely agree about his point about, the importance of the moral statement and you know, pulling out from investigating war crimes, and all of this is terrible. And getting rid of the departments that are investigating foreign interference into US elections, all the things that the Trump administration have done to just deconstruct their entire government and also side with Russia. But there is an important aspect to the idea that the US might rubber stamp Russia's formal annexation of Crimea. And this, if you don't mind, I'm going to read something out to you that I read out on my my video the other day. So if it's true that the US were willing to give away Crimea formally to Russia, the US is considering recognizing some or all of Russia's land grabs achieved through force and aggression. It would mark a fundamental shift in US foreign policy of over 93 years. So this is really, really important. It signals the end of the international legal order and state sovereignty as we know it. In response to Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and the creation of the puppet state of Manchukuo, US Secretary of State Henry Stimson issued a formal non-recognition policy in January 1932. What became to be known as the Stimson Doctrine stated that the US would not recognize territorial changes resulting from aggression or violations of international agreements. This policy was applied to Japan's conquest of China and later extended to Nazi Germany's annexations. The policy of not recognizing territorial gains made by force was formally articulated in the Sumner Welles Declaration of July 23, 1940, when the United States refused to recognize the Soviet annexation of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The principle became the cornerstone of US Cold War policy, leading to decades-long non-recognition of Soviet territorial expansions. The prohibition use of force for territorial gains is a main idea of the UN Charter Article 2-4. This is a cornerstone of modern state sovereignty. US based its action in the first Gulf War on this principle. President George H.W. Bush issued a non-recognition statement on August 5, 1990, quote, "A puppet regime imposed from the outside will not be tolerated. We do not recognize this annexation, nor will we ever recognize it." Finally, in July 2018, the previous Trump administration issued the Crimea Declaration that states, quote, "As we did in the Welles Declaration in 1940, the US reaffirms as policy its refusal to recognize the Kremlin's claims of sovereignty over territory seized by force in contravention of international law in concert with allies, partners in the international community. The US rejects Russia's attempted annexation of Crimea and pledges to maintain this policy until Ukraine's territorial integrity is restored." And just to finish, right now, this text seems to have been removed from the US Kiev Embassy's website, okay? And if we are truly witnessing the reversal of the Stimson Doctrine and the dismantling of the UN Charter, then as of tomorrow, so if the US were to agree with Crimea's formal annexation, we will be living in a profoundly different world. And that is giving permission to formally give permission to nations to take territory by force. And then that paves the way for the US to do that to Greenland, Canada, and Panama. So you can connect these things, and it is insanely dangerous.
Jonathan, did you write that?
No, I didn't.
It's excellent. That is completely spot on. It's excellent. We need to disseminate that. Very good.
I honestly, I read that the other day and it's like, holy shit, this is this is more serious than you think. It's, you know, just giving away Crimea in a treaty negotiation, you might think nothing of it, but actually it blows out the water 100 years of formal foreign policy doctrine and gives permission to anyone to do that, and then gives permission for the US to do it.
This actually is exactly the point I'm making, which is that we are watching a jurisprudential, moral, and ethical revolution that the world has not seen in the 20th or the 21st century. And I would rather that, you know, there are land battles that we're losing for the moment than that we give up the entire legal system, the entire ethical system that holds the world together. Because if we give that up, we lose all the land eventually, every bit of it. We lose everything. So we cannot give up this high ground. And part of the high ground is the fact that the blessing, honestly, of what Macron called, you know, the World War II. I've forgotten the term that he used to describe the benefit that we had coming out of World War II, which is 80 years of believing and holding each other accountable to really simple ethical principles. Don't shoot civilians, don't steal land, honor people's sovereignty, which served as the warp and the woof of our entire international legal theory. So this is a comprehensive revolution. It's as if we went from a modern civilized society to officially adopting Genghis Khan's expansionist worldview.
Yeah. I've put the link to that in the private chat if you just want to access it and any other points. So.
I do. Thank you. Excellent.
The other point I'd make there, and this is where I'm going to also defer to Starsky afterwards, Trump is working, he has inherited wealth, but in his world, when you get wealthy, you get power. Power comes to those with wealth, status comes to those with wealth, and an increase in wealth, multiplying your wealth, in his mind, is an increase of that sort of status and moving you up the hierarchy. That is not how Russia works. Money accrues to those who are powerful and those who are willing to project violence and force. So we've got a fundamental different understanding of how status accrues and even how wealth accrues in these two systems. Trump, I think, is assuming that Putin operates on his rules and that somehow he has earned the authority and status rather than stealing it and then holding it by sort of force of violence. Trump hasn't really earned his money, but there are oligarchs who have earned their money in the West and their status as a result, whether they're nice human beings or not. So I think we're dealing with two fundamentally different systems here. And I think Trump, despite admiring Putin, does not understand the mechanics of Russia really at all. I don't know, Starsky, whether you got some thoughts on that.
Probably he understands it very well. That's just my opinion. Because apparently he has a very good communication with Putin. He has a very good communication with other terrorists. Kim Jong, I'm not sure. But apparently he understands how it works very, very well. It's not like he is deluded by Putin that lies and things like that. No, at this very moment, there is a very clear communication agenda that I can personally see implemented in the Trump administration in the United States. And to me, this communication agenda smells like made in Russia today. For some reason, because you probably saw that they don't call Russians like invaders, aggressors. They don't recognize it. They offer some kind of weird statements in the United Nations calling to finally stop this conflict, right? They never call it invasion, because this is shift of narratives. The narrative between 2022 and 2025 was the Russian invasion, and from late January, it's now called like a conflict, a brutal war that should never have happened. So it's not like Trump doesn't understand the Russian world and the risks that it brings. Actually, no, in my personal opinion, it's like Trump wants it in the United States. Trump wants that culture to be implemented, to be borrowed from the Russian administration and be implemented in the American administration. That is what I clearly see.
And this is concerning, isn't it? Because okay, Trump doesn't really read books, and he didn't write one either. That was ghost written. But he does say a lot of things, and we tend to dismiss the sort of word salad that comes out of his mouth. But when he mentions things more than once, when he mentions them several times in a row, when his minions sort of repeat it and make jokes about it, such as invading Canada, should we be paying attention to this? Because again, they always say you've lost the argument if you compare things to Hitler. But when Mein Kampf came out, it was derided and ridiculed, and people looked at that and like, there's no way, when he comes to office, he's going to do these things, because they're mad, and they're not like anything that's ever been done before by a modern leader. They had dismissed it out of hand. Are we at risk of dismissing some of the, crazy thing Trump comes out with? Because actually, taking Greenland by force, somehow subsuming Canada. These fit very well within the Putinist vision of how the world works.
It's a tripolar kind of world. Professor Robert Kelly on Times Radio today was talking about how Trump does just spitball, but the thing is, I'd also take it seriously what he says, especially if he repeats it. I just want to sort of disagree with Operator Starsky. Sorry, mate, again, but there was a really interesting interview by Foreign Affairs with Fiona Hill. So Fiona Hill was the National Security Council member during the Trump administration. And in the Huffington Post article today, in a lengthy interview that says, with Foreign Affairs released Thursday, Hill described Trump as unprepared for meetings with his Russian counterpart and overly fixated on personal interactions rather than diplomatic strategy, right? Which I absolutely would 100% think that would be the case. She said, quote, "The very first time I was on one of the phone calls with Putin, I was listening very carefully to the Russian because the interpreters don't always capture everything. They don't all capture the nuances, particularly when it's the Russian interpreter who's translating into a language that's also not their native language. All kinds of things are missing." So Trump, for all the years, had expressed his admiration for Putin and has recently parroted Russian talking points in a bid to broker a peace deal to end Russia's invasion in neighboring Ukraine, described the exchange as great, she said. So Trump has this idea that he has these great interactions with Putin, but Hill recalled thinking that it really wasn't. Quote, "There were all kinds of menace in what Putin had said. He chooses his words very carefully. Many times when Putin and Trump are interacting, Putin's actually making fun of him. It's just that it's completely lost in the translation. I can give lots of episodes of this, or he's goading him and urging him onto something because he's trying to see how he'll react. And the translation smooths over all of that. That context is absolutely missing. And he doesn't do a readout afterwards. All of this is amateur hour."
Yeah. Starsky and Craig, I mean, you've listened to more hours of Russian propaganda than is healthy. But one thing you get, I mean, 0 hours is the healthy dose when it comes to Russian propaganda. But there is unfortunately, I'm going to make a huge generalization here, but there is in some Russian culture an absolute sense of exceptionalism, an absolute sense that everybody else is stupid and wrong. And actually, when you're in Russia, people will often look at each other that way as well. But especially when it comes to outsiders. But this sense of needing to demonstrate that superiority, the need to humiliate others, the need to mock, that's not exception. This isn't just Putin. He does this because he knows it gets traction with the elite. He knows it gets traction with many educated liberal Russians as well. That they actually feed off the idea that they are superior, that the US is a degenerate culture, that Americans are not smart. This is what they will think and what they repeat. And he's got a ready audience for this stuff. Am I getting that wrong? Is this too generalized, or do you get this impression from listening into a lot of the propagandistic output?
You're absolutely correct, and the main reason for that is because the whole Russian culture, and if we can call it culture, the whole Russian existence is basically based on violence. It's based on violence produced by their elites on their general population and disseminated in the general population. In Russia, it's either you are somebody who commits violence or you're a victim. They don't have any other option. The main difference between the people on the West and Russians, there's actually two. In Russia, they despise everybody else, right? In Russia, they are raised as a supreme nation, Russian world, and everything else, which in other countries you will never see. You will never see that. No matter is it Germany or Italy, you will not see that. You will not see people raised with the belief that you're French, you are better than anybody else, everybody, because Europe already went through this in the World War II. We know how it ends, right? So another thing is when the well-being of people is dropping down, if it's decreasing, people in Europe usually start protesting, they start expressing their protest. It's a normal thing. And generally, like one of my concerns about the current strategy that is being implemented in Europe regarding their defense, one of the concerns is that in case this changes the well-being of European population, this may result in such parties as German AfD, for example, growing in popularity. That is really bad. In Russia, it doesn't work like that. In Russia, if well-being drops, like, you cannot say anything really, because if you go outside and start protesting, you're done. So that is two biggest differences between Russians and Europeans. Europeans are not taught that they are like supreme nation, but they know how to fight for their rights. Russians are educated that you are supreme. When you go to a different country, you gotta wear this shirt saying, I'm Russian, deal with it. But at the same time, they live in shit. And they don't do anything to change it. That is reality. Life in Russia is basically it's a suffering on its own. That is literally suffering. Therefore, they don't know better, but they don't want it.
And I would answer it completely agreeing with Starsky, because I listen to it every day because I want to help the world understand it. And I speak Russian, so as you do, Mr. Fink. And for me, I call it the greater than syndrome. Okay. It's the greater than syndrome. And that's my own phrase, my own terminology. But we see that in my personal interaction, I started working in Russia in 1994 and then started working in Ukraine in 1998. So a lot of history there. Almost 5 years of my life inside Ukraine and Russia. And the greater than syndrome that is there in that Russian propaganda narrative, it chips away with just a sliver of truth, just a sliver. And it's compounded by a narrative that is nonstop, day after day after day, and it wears down on the psyche of the individual, the psyche of people. And now people around the world who had no experience with Russian propaganda until the full-scale invasion broke out, and then folks started paying attention to what's happening in Ukraine. And then we started to see things translated for us and things explained to us. Then we began to see and understand what is actually happening. And it's time over time compounded with a greater than syndrome. I've experienced it personally. I see it in Ukrainians regularly who have actual family members inside Russia who have actually broken all relationships and call their own kin, their own family members, neo-Nazi regimes. You are lied to by Kyiv. They are completely under that poisonous spell. And it's interesting because this is not new. And the United States now experiencing it. We can go all the way back to the days of Khrushchev. And I continue, and I know Starsky continues this narrative as well. And I know the rest of you do. And I'm just meeting DW, but this is not anything new. This has been going on since the 50s with an intentional plan. And you can even take it back further, even to Hollywood, when the great Ronald Reagan, sorry for guys that don't like Ronald Reagan, but the great Ronald Reagan was the president of the Screen Actors Guild. And his number one job was fighting communism that was trying to invade the Hollywood narrative. So this has been there pushing now for 100 years. And the United States now, under the leadership of Donald Trump, is spewing the exact same message, the exact same narrative, the exact same greater than. It's like a delusional syndrome. I am so embarrassed that the president of the United States, for example, would call the leader of the sovereign nation of Canada the governor, would continue to call the 51st state, would stand in the sacred Capitol building addressing a joint session of Congress when the world is watching, and make the snide remark with his head tilted to the side, well, Greenland, we want you to decide for yourself, but one way or the other, we're going to get you. That is what Vladimir Putin says. That is not what the president of the United States says. So now we can actually close the chapter on that, because the president of the United States does now say that, and it's a fact. And this, I just call it greater than. We're just greater than, and it's an evil. And Starsky's right. And I would add on top of that, not only death and killing and the mafia-ism and the like the macho of the Godfather narrative. It's like we see with the activists being killed in Odessa, just murdered brutally on the street just a couple of days ago. This evil that spreads. But in addition to that, you that just get into a completely different zombie world that is indescribable unless you have experienced with the mixture of narrative, evil, destruction, death, drug, alcohol. I mean, it is absolutely a tangled web of, I have no better word, sorry, JP, of evil and darkness. That's it. It's evil and darkness.
I find it interesting to see Russia in terms of I think their sense of who they are is built on other people's misery. So I think their foreign policy, and you could argue domestic policy approach, is a negative sum game, which is like, rather than pumping money into our own society and into these regions of Russia that's so underfunded and needs so much stimulus and et cetera, they pump money into making other people look bad. And if the other people look bad, it makes you feel like you're better. So Russia just spend the whole time dissing everyone else rather than making themselves better. That's the whole, I think, the whole approach to governance is not taking care of their own, but smashing the perception of other people and selling that perception to their own people. So their own people think, well, we're better than them. That kind of greater than type thing that Greg was talking about, and that appears to be everything they do, because they sure as heck don't spend any money, well, not nearly enough money on sorting out their own problems and infrastructure back in Russia.
Okay, let me take it a step further. You guys know that I am fighting the evil narrative of MAGA and this Trump disaster in the right wing in America. I'm fighting it specifically in the church world, in the evangelical church world. You guys know I'm a Christian. I'm a pastor. I'm on the front lines of Ukraine. They call me the machine gun preacher. So I run around with my weapon, and it's loaded in the truck, in my body armor, and have communion with soldiers. That's what I do, and fight for the truth. Okay, so I'm fighting against this evil on the right. That's what we have to do. Here's how bad it is. Here's how bad it is. I have people, no matter where I go in the United States, that we would generally look at and say, that's a good American. That's just a good person, nice person, doing good, do a nice deed, etc. They will look at me point blank in the eyeball and say, Greg, I've known you your whole life. We're so appreciative for the things you do, the humanitarian work, the efforts there around the world, your work. But when it comes to Ukraine, you're just completely wrong. Donald Trump is completely right. Elon Musk is completely right. And I will tell them, okay, I'm there. You know I'm there. You know I'm with these people for 28 years. I'm bringing you video. I'm bringing you stories. I'm telling you, I'm translating, and they go, it doesn't matter. You're wrong. They're right. That is how far the right in America that have chosen the Donald Trump path have gone. And it's my opinion, and DW, I know you're the other American in here. They've gone down the toilet. I'm sorry to say, that far, and I'm really trying to fight against that. And people get mad at me and upset, or rail at Gertis and myself. But we're fighting for the truth in that crowd.
We live in a post-truth, society of an epistemic crisis where people can pick and choose their truths and then post hoc rationalize, which means that you pick your truth and then you spend the rest of the time scrabbling around looking for justification for that truth. And it's just a desire, it's a preference rather than something you arrive at through a process of evaluating evidence.
And this is where I think the other aspect of, we talked about Russian exceptionalism. The other thing that Russians suffer from, of course, is hubris and overextension, or overestimating their strengths, and conversely underestimating the strengths of Ukraine at every turn. Putin is sabotaging the very thing that I think he knows deep down that he needs. His economy is in a dire state. Ukraine is eating away at his oil revenues, and Europe is waking up militarily. He needs a ceasefire of some sort, but his pathological behavior, mindset, exceptionalism, loathing, and his view of Ukrainians as unfortunately subhuman, and he does see Ukrainians as Untermenschen in the same way that Hitler saw, numerous nationalities. He will not be able to do the thing that even he accepts may be necessary, which means he's going to carry on overextending Russia, overextending it to the point where he will lose control. And, there won't be some popular revolution, but it will fall apart in some way. OS.
Yeah, Jonathan, check the chat, please.
Yeah, so while Jonathan looks at that, it's interesting today that, and this is completely changing the subject possibly, so sorry, Jonathan, but just filling in the void. Interesting that Ukraine have possibly counterattacked across the border into Belgorod, and I know that Greg has some contacts in, and I was speaking to Greg when I was out in Ukraine recently, and we were talking about a potential attack across the border at some point, and there was that, and it maybe what we were talking about then, Greg, is what has happened today. I don't know whether it's going to amount to anything particularly significant, but the timing of that seemed to be very, very not coincidental.
As my daughter would say here in the US, she would say, Dad, the timing on that is sus, because the news started to come out. At first, it was propagated, and I was watching this very close because I got up today ready for the day, hoping for a better result than we had as we are sitting here now discussing it. But it initially came out this morning only from Russian media. So Russian media started pushing right before the Trump-Putin call that the Ukrainians were invading the Belgorod region. And they were pushing it. They were dropping some drone footage. They were showing a column of 4 or 5 vehicles coming. So I was watching it, and then, okay, well, it looks like they're going to, Putin's going to say, hey, you helped us, Donald, by stopping the intelligence so we could kind of push Ukraine back out of Suja a little bit. In course, thank you for that. Now you see what happens. They're trying to come into the Belgorod region now and get onto another piece of our sovereign territory. But what was interesting about it, then some Ukrainians that I trust started confirming that Ukraine actually was not an invasion, but pushing a significant amount of resources up to that Belgorod border. Then we had the governor of the Belgorod region come on and make a video and say, hey, it looks like Ukraine is getting ready to come across the border in Belgorod. We need to pay attention to it, making the governor appeal back to the Kremlin and Putin, making people aware. And then we had some confirmation from some members of the general staff that there was actually a movement on the Belgorod region. So I try to only give the facts. Has a big column of Ukraine invaded Belgorod? The answer to that is no. But was there a significant action there at the border that's confirmed also by Ukraine today? Yes, there was. So we'll see what comes from it. But right now, the timing of it was definitely sus when Russia started pushing it before the call. But there's some legitimacy to some action there on the Belgorod border.
Jonathan, I'm going to have to step out in just a minute. I want to offer just one last thought before I go, with the permission of you gentlemen here. So about a week and a half ago, I had an article published on the front page of the Kyiv Post, and it was a correspondence between myself to Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And it was a personal appeal that he would take the moral high ground, that he would remember exactly what, Greg, you talked about earlier today. Today, I have a different message, and I kind of want to leave sharing this in case there are any Americans that are listening to this today. So probably like you, Greg, and Starsky, you, and all of you men, I'm sure, the last week I've been just on the phone. I haven't slept. I've been up all night talking to people throughout Ukraine, many of them enduring bombs raining down on their homes while I'm talking to them. And I would say that something that I feel very motivated right now is to write a love letter through many communications to the people of Ukraine, and to let them know that what's happening in Washington, D.C. is not a reflection of the best of the United States of America. And that while this is a dark moment, it isn't the last moment. It isn't the only moment. That in point of view, we're going to see this is not sustainable. Yes, we could go down a very dark path for a very long period of time, but this is not the American perspective. It isn't the American spirit, what we're seeing right now. And as I speak to Ukrainians, they need that encouragement, because there's nothing worse than being in a fight and being abandoned by a friend. It's like the scene, you know, in Braveheart, where William Wallace is, he thinks he's fighting the bad guy, and he pulls off the helmet, and who does he see? It's his friend, Robert the Bruce, who ultimately comes around in the end, but only after an awful lot of trouble in between, and the death of William Wallace himself. And I think that I know this may sound very non-political, but right now I'm advocating for words of encouragement, love letters to Ukraine, reminders that we do not, Americans are, a lot of them are confused, but if you ask them the right questions, they're actually going to give you the right answers. You got to ask them the right questions.
The polls show that as well.
If you frame the question correctly, they're going to give you the right answers. So that's what I'm doing.
Right.
I've got a special forces kind of bodyguard guy who takes good care of me when I'm over in Ukraine. He was there in Maidan. He's just wonderful. He's amazing. He's my guy when I'm in Ukraine. And he called up my son who was in Pokrovsk not too long ago. And he called up my son, and he was just like pulling the hair out of his head and screaming, like, what is your country doing? What is happening? And I realized that there are millions of Ukrainians that actually need encouragement from the U.S. right now, because they're not going to get it from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. They need to hear it from the people. They need to hear it from the pastors. They need to hear it from the Joes on the street. And I'm really in agreement with you, Greg. They need to hear it from people that are on the right-hand side. We expect it from the Democrats, and I'm glad for that. But they need to hear it from the other people too. So with that, I'll say I've got an article going out in the Kyiv Post, which is about this. It's kind of a love letter from Americans to Ukrainians at a very bad moment of time. And even as I critique the horror show taking place in Washington, I want us to remember that we are better, the American people, and the Brits have already shown this. The French are rising up. Thank God for all of that. But we're better than this very dark moment. And I, for one, as American, will not sit back quietly and go quietly into the night during this very tragic, shameful moment for us. To you men, thank you for your good work. Thanks for letting me join the broadcast for right now. And I hope to see all of you guys soon. Jonathan, you are the best.
Thank you so much.
No, but listen, you are the best. You are reaching.
Thank you, DW.
I'm sorry.
Oh, wrong Jonathan. Wrong Jonathan.
JF, my friend Jonathan Fink, and I'm sure Jonathan Pierce, we're also great. But Jonathan Fink, what you have done through your network, through Silicon, unbelievable. I am the #1 American Jonathan Fink fan. So stand fast. We'll talk to you guys later.
DW, can you make sure that you send your Kyiv Post article out? Like, I don't know, like I'd love to read it and B, like, spread it.
Happily. I have one that's already been published. This one will probably go out in a couple of days. We'll see what happens. So it ultimately ends up what the editor agrees to. So, okay, fellas, we'll talk to you all
Amen,
later.
DW, and thank you, sir.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Look forward to
Pleasure.
more.
We'll talk more, Greg. I'm confident.
For sure. Absolutely.
You know, DW was talking about that bodyguard that helps him whenever he goes to Ukraine. I've got one of those. He's called Greg Terry.
Yeah, I take care of you, buddy.
He's a beast of a man. He's a beast
I take
of a
care
man.
of you. I will say this, and I really appreciate DW there, but I want the people, we've got a lot of people watching right now, and we say thank you for, just listening to our conversation and we're really trying to hash out a lot of the things that unfolded today. Some things did not surprise us, and some things may have taken us aback just a touch. I really had hoped for a better showing coming out of this call, and now we see basically a nothing burger, and I'm believing that this is going to rally even more support for Ukraine and push the European narrative to stand up, as we've already been discussing. But I do want to say this to everybody. Here's the truth. Forget the right and the left and viewpoints and all of that stuff. Everybody's entitled to have their own viewpoint. Everybody's entitled to look at the world and to look at their life the way they want to and the way they choose. But regardless of that, when we get down to it and we're honest as people, we realize that no matter what camp you come from, whether it's DW, Professor Gertis, myself, Starsky there as a Ukrainian, YouTube, JP's in UK, and we have all these different philosophies. When it comes down to it, literally, we agree on at least 90% of things. There's just few literal things that divide us, and it's not division that try to separate us. And when we can take the moral high ground and say, no, we agree on so much more than we disagree on, we find out how much we have in common, and the other things just fade off to the side. I mean, I have no dearer friend in the world than Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This man has multiple sclerosis. I took him around the entire front line, falling down. We pick him up. He's falling down the steps, walking into the apartment in Kherson, which JP right now, as you may or may not know, has been demolished.
No way. The guest house.
Yes, been demolished.
Oh, my goodness.
But the reality is, man, like, you're my hero. And philosophically, we don't see everything the same, but man, I'm so honored to call you my friend. There's nothing better.
You
and
too,
then spending time with Jonathan Fink in Kyiv, and we figured out, oh man, we're the same way. I'm honored. And now Starsky and I never met personally, but I can tell you one thing: we have a heart bond, because I know what this man has done, where he's been, and who he is as a Ukrainian veteran and hero. He knows where I've been and what I do. There's a heart bond. We know it, and nobody could ever divide that. It's not possible. So I'm just honored that we can come together, and this is the message that's needed to defeat Russia. This is the message that's needed to defeat the MAGA and the Trump movement right now, is that what binds us together is much stronger than what divides us. That's it.
Absolutely. And the
I-
whole
I-
left,
I
the
would-
whole
I would like-
left-right thing.
I would like to add one thing. We all got to remember that the main goal ever for the Russian propaganda is to divide, is to sow discord. That is the main goal, not like pushing some candidate over other. No, it's divide. This is their task number one. It's pumping up hatred and pumping the fear of tomorrow. I'm not making up anything. That is literally from the investigation that was published last year by the FBI. So that is literally the KPI for the Russian communications agencies working on sowing discord in the Western countries. That is their KPI. The hatred, the division in the society. We all must remember that whenever you receive some kind of information that is completely emotional, that makes you feel emotional, that makes you hate your neighbor, right? Always ask yourself, why do you hear that, where it comes from, what is the source, and what is the end result of this message. That is extremely important to remember, that Russians will always try to divide you, no matter what. and we should stay together. That is as simple as that. We should stay together. We should respect each other, and we should be less toxic. That's very important.
Totally agreed. Jonathan, do we have time to just thank a few super chatters and whatnot?
We do have, but I wanted to set the record straight while Greg is still here. Half the time Jonathan falls over because of the very unfortunate condition. Half the time because he's absolutely shit-faced. I mean,
because he's
put
tippling.
that out there.
Because
he's absolutely.
I would like to say this is outright just slander, but it is indeed correct. I mean, just if I could get through at least half a day without just putting back those beers in Ukraine, I could have achieved so much more.
You did amazing, and just once again, you know, that just proves that it's like DW was saying with the love letters to Ukraine. You know, you going there, man. And we take Jane and I taking you and Pierre to all those places and meeting all those soldiers and you getting your real experience there.
I really wish we could fly. I really wish they opened the airports, because half the problem about getting to Ukraine, and this would be so good for their economy,
it's difficult.
It's the fact that it takes 2 days to get in from
it does.
like the UK and 2 days to get out.
Well, you ought to come from America. It's tough.
Yeah.
But the reality is, Jonathan, you just being there communicated volumes. And I think this is what we're all saying, and Star School's even saying. Yeah. It's the presence, it's the words, it's the love letters, it's standing together. Yeah. And
really good point.
It's the best, man. It's the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're going to read out some stuff. You did mention something very earlier. I just wanted to give a quick heads up to you. You talked about this huge arms package that has been approved, and the limitations of the traditional budget no longer apply to Germany's rearmament program. Tomorrow, I'll be interviewing Dr. Benjamin Tallis, who's going to do an absolute breakdown. He's going to do a breakdown of exactly what this rearmament means and actually why it's great, but there needs to be some real thought behind it. You know, why innovation, just not sort of, rearming in terms of mass and heavy metal. That's not going to do it. You also need innovation, drone skills and so on. Well, we're having this conversation tomorrow, and that's going to be coming out on Friday. So watch out for that.
He's just written a book called Turning Point, hasn't he? And
this is it.
Yeah,
we'll be talking about that.
I'd love to speak to him.
Jonathan, I'm sorry.
Yep.
What time will that happen?
So I'm speaking sometime during the day tomorrow, and then it will be published 6 o'clock on Friday.
Thank you.
Just a big thanks to Michael Vuchar, Richard Bennett, and Kevin Forst, for giving those ATP Geopolitics memberships. That's super generous. Thank you to Ole Nielsen for that super chat. That's really generous. Then one for you, Jonathan, which is Subhero. In my opinion, Rubio genuinely hates Russia, but I'm a bit surprised some of the panelists consider him to have any sort of a spine. His capitulation on any subject opposite power is wholly expected behavior. I couldn't disagree with that, to be fair. I'm
worried about Mark Rutte, but we'll come to that in the next conversation.
Yeah, I think there's some nuance to be had there. But anyway, we'll come on to that. Johnny Nebregard, thank you very much to him. That's to you, Jonathan. And then Mitch to my channel, Mitch Mazarol. Thank you, gents. Thanks for another important stream. Very pleased to see Starsky and DW join in. The more of these are better. As Stalin purportedly and ironically once said, quantity has a quality of its own. Thanks, Mitch. He's such a ledge. Spuddy is one of yours. Thank you to him. Javier Alvarez for myself. What should the right counter move be by Ukraine? Push for the original ceasefire or play the delay game? And we kind of talked about that. You said that, Jonathan, which is play a delay game, get Europe on board, and I think that personally I'd agree.
Keep making noises that we want peace, but at the same time strike back, continue striking back, rearming, getting ready. Absolutely, don't delay anything.
And it's not that you don't want peace. You want peace from a position of strength. I mean, that's the point. Get to the strength first. Yeah. Dr. Battery, thanks, guys, for the stream. No need to pull up. Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Battery, all the way from Oz. I do believe near the 12 Apostles. You'd like that. Greg, it's the Great Ocean Road down in Victoria. Anyway, Mitch Mazarol, please ask Starsky where he feels the greatest fundraising needs are currently, or campaigns he'd like to highlight to the viewers.
I would like to highlight the fundraising campaign for Harmata Volunteers. Harmata Volunteers is a foundation that specifically works to help my brigade. It's a 4th Operative Brigade of the National Guard Rubish, the glorious Hostomel Brigade. And I would like you guys to direct you to this foundation, because currently they are working to raise fund for several thousand drones for our guys, and this is absolutely great cause that we should support. So please check out Harmata Volunteers. I will drop you link in the chat.
Drop the link in the chat. I'll put it in the
yeah.
video description as well for people who are watching this
Okay.
Afterwards. Yeah.
And just a final couple thanks to Kathy's guess and Kathy's guess. Really appreciate your support. That's absolutely phenomenal. Thank you to all of you. Now, Mark Rutte, I have to shoot in a second, but just very quickly on Mark Rutte. My initial reaction was exactly the same as yours, Jonathan. And then I put something on the back chat that we're talking about. Someone, and I actually talked about this on one of my news videos today or yesterday. Some people in my threads who are Dutch hit me with, you've got to understand what Mark Rutte's like. He's kept impossible coalitions together. Basically, that's how he's been in charge of, the Netherlands for a long time. And also, don't always believe what he says. There are other things that are happening behind the scenes. So what the more charitable interpretation of Mark Rutte, for those who don't know, Mark Rutte basically said NATO accession is off the table. So a charitable understanding is that it practically is off the table. So the US have said no, and Hungary said no, and Slovakia, I think, are probably pretty much a no. So, like, for all intents and purposes, they're not going to get. You need a unanimous agreement to get into NATO, and Ukraine simply wouldn't do that. So he's probably appeasing Trump in order to get something for NATO going forward. His job is to keep NATO together, primarily, right? It is to support Ukraine. But if NATO doesn't exist, then it can't support Ukraine. So his number one job is to sort of appease Trump at the moment, to keep him happy enough that NATO continues having US input until there's a new president that comes along, whilst at the same time putting things in place through European NATO partners to do something for Ukraine. So I would guess that there's probably something more complex going on with Mark Rutte rather than him giving away. We know he massively supports Ukraine, right? So he's not going to be giving away stuff without there being something going on behind that. So I've changed my opinion from being really critical of Rutte to thinking actually it's probably more complex.
I agree on that, by the way, because if I can, I completely agree on that, by the way. And just probably a week ago, Mark Rutte was openly saying that we should call Russia for what they are, which is a terrorist regime. They're committing terrorist acts in Europe. They attempted to commit terrorist acts against the United States and Canada by sending the airplanes. Apparently he was talking about that, airplanes with the incendiary devices on board. So he is the one who has completely clear vision on the situation in Ukraine. But there is a problem. There is a problem that United States produces big chunk of weaponry, I would say a critical chunk of weaponry currently used by the European NATO members. And you have to dance with Trump somehow, in order to keep him satisfied and to keep the weaponry coming to European countries on the first place. That is why what he did is what nowadays and like usually is called diplomacy. This is what you do as a chief of NATO if you want to run NATO. That is why I completely agree with our friend.
Yeah, and I think Jonathan Fink has a Dutch person in his chat, actually. Is it Yilke 1989 saying pretty much the same thing in a couple of their comments there. So, although, some people don't like Mark Rutte, okay? It depends where you sit on the political spectrum, I guess, in the Netherlands. But from my point of view, it's like, he's not going to be hanging Ukraine out to dry in public, and unless I think there's something else going on there.
I'm with Cheryl here. I think there'll come a point where keeping a zombie NATO going, or on life support, which clearly is trying to do it. I mean, not only that, he'll be out of a job if it ceases to exist. So there's that as well. There comes a point where it becomes a distraction, where it prevents people from actually taking the actions that are required and building the alliances that are required, unless, of course, they know it's become, this zombie entity that's incapable already of taking the action.
It's all about Trump. It's all about Trump.
No, maybe keep that going just to distract him while you do the real thing over there. So I don't know. Maybe that's part of it as well. Maybe it's an agreed strategy. It's not easy to watch in appeasement in real time, though, especially after having read, as we do in Britain, and seen so much history of the Second World War. And not just that, the particular interest I've always had in the Second World War is not necessarily, the war, of course, is fascinating. It's the bit where Hitler and his goons dismantle what was a fairly sophisticated, rule of law state, and the methodology and the speed with which they did it, and then seeing that happen in real time. We're going to have to go in a second. This is a question maybe to queue up for Greg, because I want to get Darren and Greg and maybe DW on as well onto one of these, and pose what might have seemed quite a controversial statement a few weeks ago or a few months ago, when I first sort of started throwing this at a few Americans who I know. Now it seems not so absurd, and that is that either you're in the resistance or you're collaborating, and those who seek to sit on the fence and pretend it's not happening are now the enablers of Trump, just as much as those who are actively supporting him. So this is quite a controversial thing, but the idea that now is the time not to try to necessarily appease Trump from within, but it's now the time to fight him, and this is especially for people on the right as well.
Well, we look forward to it, and I will accept that invitation, and I will accept it for Prof. Gerdes as well. I know he would be more than happy to do that, but I will tell you right now, your thesis, your viewpoint is spot on, because right now I am 100% anti-Trump, anti-MAGA. I hate, and that's a very strong word, but I hate what is happening in my country. And no, there is not a time to sit on the fence. You can't play it. I have so much hatred coming at me now from the right and from the Christian world, like I'm the traitor. Okay. And you know what? Don't pick a fight with me, because I'm a fighting man. And sorry, but I'm going to stand for what I believe in. But if you believe that Donald Trump is the second coming of Jesus Christ rolling into the world on a white horse to be the savior of mankind, you are a lunatic. And if you are spreading that message, it is a message of evil, and it must be destroyed. And I'm just telling you, man, it'll be a great conversation. We accept the invitation, and I'll speak for Prof, and I'll call him after the stream and let him know. But it's where we're at, and there's just so much hatred, and it's so much division. Once again, going straight back to what Starsky said, that is what the Russians do. That's what the propaganda machine does, is it divides. And listen, united we stand, divided we fall. That's a principle, no matter where you take it from, it stands. I will just say this, closing out. Thank you. I've really enjoyed having this conversation with you guys, and look forward to more. But every day, and I don't want to open a new can of worms, but every day we see the Yuri Bezmenov narrative of 1984 unfolding, and Donald Trump is putting it on a hell-bent pace to be fully accomplished. And that is the 4 stages of ideological subversion. We're seeing it unfold at a record pace right in front of our faces, demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and then you bring that to normalcy, and then you're in deep caca. So this is where we're at, and look forward to the future friendship and partnership with you guys. Slava Ukraina.
Greg showed me.
Slava.
Greg showed me that video in the battle bus behind the front lines when I was there last year in February. So yeah, I remember that Bezmenov. Anyway,
Yeah,
Bezmenov.
Yeah. Yes. Good stuff.
Thank you all.
That's it. We're winding up. I'm so appreciative. Especially, I mean, Greg, it's ridiculously late where you are. 1 a.m. It's midnight. Wherever Starsky is.
No, I'm good. I'm in
Pennsylvania. We're not going to give away the location.
Okay, listen. Oh yeah. No, I'm fine. I'm on the East Coast of the United States. I'm either here. I'm either here or there. I'm either here in Pennsylvania or I'm in Ukraine. That's the only two places, nonstop back and forth. But thank you for caring about me, and I appreciate it. It's late for you guys.
You've got several live streams still to come. Then you've still got. We're all going to get our beauty sleep.
Thank you.
Some of us
one
need
that
it more
needs
than
the most beauty sleep just spoke. Yeah, Jonathan M.S. Pierce, the tippling philosopher, needs a little bit extra.
That's right. 20 years younger than me, but life has been hard.
This is incredibly harsh. Look, I'm no oil painting, but look, I just want to say thank you to all of the people in this live chat as well. Thank you to Spuddy, who's done a super chat. You guys are incredible, and it's communities like you that obviously keep us going, but more importantly, give solace to Ukrainians who are, as we know, fighting for their freedom and democracy, but also I think for us as well. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll all keep you abreast of what's going on. I can't believe how much content I'm putting out at the moment because the world seems to be insane, and there's just no break. I'm like, oh my goodness. Every morning I wake up and like, what insanity is going to have taken place overnight? But
I've come to the conclusion you sleep in that chair.
Yeah, pretty much. I think so does my family. So I probably need to go and say hello to them.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, bro.
OS, great to see you. We'll catch up soon. Cheers,
Thank
Greg.
you so much.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Bye-bye.
Okay, y'all.